The stagecoach rattled to a stop in a cloud of dust as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the small frontier town of Redemption Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1875. Katherine Ross clutched her worn carpet bag to her chest, wincing as the motion pressed against the fresh bruises hidden beneath her high-necked blouse. The driver called out their arrival, but she remained frozen in her seat, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake coming to this desolate outpost with nothing but $5 to her name and a letter from a cousin she barely knew. "End of the line, madam," the driver said, his impatience evident as he held the door open. "Everybody out." Katherine descended carefully, her body aching from both the 3-day journey and the beating her husband had given her before she'd fled in the dead of night. The small town spread before her, a single dirt street lined with wooden buildings, most already dark as evening approached. Only the saloon blazed with light and raucous laughter. She pulled her shawl tighter despite the lingering summer heat, trying to hide the bruise that peeked above her collar. The stagecoach departed with a crack of the whip, leaving her alone in the gathering dusk, unsure where to go. "You look lost." The deep voice startled her. Katherine turned to find a tall man watching her from the shadows of the general store porch. He stepped into the fading light, revealing a weather-beaten face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes were kind but wary, like those of a man who'd seen too much of the world's cruelty. "I'm looking for Emma Winters," she managed, her throat dry from dust and fear. "She's my cousin." The man's expression shifted to something unreadable. "Emma's place is about 3 miles north, not the kind of walk you want to make tonight." He gestured to the darkening sky. "Storm's coming in." As if summoned by his words, a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the plains. Katherine clutched her bag tighter, panic rising. She had nowhere else to go. "Is there somewhere I might stay until morning?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. The man studied her for a long moment, his gaze lingering on the visible edge of the bruise at her neck. Something in his eyes hardened, then softened again. "I'm Vincent Irwin, own a ranch north of here. I can take you to Emma's come morning, but for tonight, Mrs. Sullivan at the boarding house might have a room." He nodded toward a 2-story building down the street. "Come on, I'll walk you there." Katherine hesitated, years of harsh lessons making her distrustful of male kindness. But as the first fat raindrops began to fall, she had little choice. The boarding house was clean but sparse, with faded wallpaper and a stern-faced proprietress who looked Katherine up and down with undisguised suspicion. "No rooms," Mrs. Sullivan declared, arms crossed over her substantial bosom. "Wedding in Cheyenne brought travelers through, full up." Vincent frowned. "Not even the back room, Martha, just for tonight, told you full up." Her eyes narrowed at Katherine. "Besides, I run a respectable establishment." Katherine felt her face flush with shame. Did her circumstances show so plainly? Or perhaps it was the bruises she couldn't fully hide. Either way, the message was clear: damaged goods weren't welcome. "I understand," she whispered, turning to leave. "Hold on." Vincent's voice stopped her. "My foreman's wife is in town, decent woman, she might put you up for the night." The rain fell harder as they hurried down the boardwalk to a small house at the edge of town. Lightning illuminated the swirling dust turned to mud, and thunder cracked overhead as Vincent knocked on the door. A round-faced woman with graying hair answered, looking surprised to see them. "Mr. Irwin, what brings you out in this weather?" "Evening, Mrs. Porter. This here is Katherine Ross. Just arrived on the evening stage looking for her cousin Emma. Needs a place for tonight." The woman's kind eyes took in Katherine's bedraggled appearance and the bruise at her neck that Katherine had given up trying to hide. Understanding passed between the two women in that silent moment. "Come in, dear," Mrs. Porter said, stepping aside. "I've got stew on the stove and a spare bed." Vincent tipped his hat. "I'll come by in the morning to take her to Emma's." He turned to Katherine. "Rest easy, Miss Ross." As he disappeared into the rain, Katherine felt a curious mixture of relief and apprehension. There was something in the cowboy's eyes that unsettled her, not danger, but a clear-sightedness that made her feel transparent, as though he could read every chapter of her painful story. Mrs. Porter proved to be a blessing. She asked no questions as she fed Katherine hot stew and cornbread, then showed her to a small but clean bedroom. Only when Katherine was settled did the older woman gently inquire, "Is there someone looking for you, dear?" Katherine tensed. "My husband, but he doesn't know I came west, Mrs. Porter nodded, patting her hand. "You rest now, you're safe here." For the first time in months, Katherine slept without fear, lulled by the steady drumming of rain on the roof. Morning arrived with clear skies and the scent of coffee. After a breakfast of eggs and biscuits, Katherine heard the clop of hooves outside. Vincent Irwin sat astride a chestnut gelding, leading a gentle-looking bay mare. "Hope you can ride," he said by way of greeting. "It's faster than walking to Emma's place." Katherine nodded, though in truth she hadn't been on a horse since childhood. Sensing her uncertainty, Vincent offered a hand, helping her mount with surprising gentleness. "Just relax and let her follow mine," he advised. "Daisy knows the way." They rode in comfortable silence for a time, the Wyoming landscape stretching around them, rolling grasslands dotted with sagebrush, distant mountains rising like sentinels against the impossibly blue sky. Katherine found herself breathing easier than she had in years, the openness of the land seeping into her soul. "How do you know my cousin?" she finally asked. Vincent kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Emma's husband Travis was my friend, fought alongside him in the war." His jaw tightened. "Lost him to pneumonia 2 winters back." "I didn't know," Katherine admitted. "Emma and I lost touch after she married. My husband." She faltered. "Charles didn't approve of her letters." Vincent glanced at her then, his gaze dropping briefly to where her bruises peeked from beneath her collar before meeting her eyes again. "Some men mistake control for strength," he said quietly. "Those men are always the weakest sort." They crested a small rise, and a modest homestead came into view, a log cabin with a stone chimney, a barn, and fenced gardens. A woman in a faded blue dress was hanging laundry on a line. She looked up at their approach, shielding her eyes against the sun. "Vincent," the woman called. Then her gaze fell on Katherine, and recognition dawned. "Katherine Ross." Emma rushed forward as they dismounted, embracing Katherine with such warmth that tears sprang to her eyes. It had been 7 years since they'd last seen each other at Emma's wedding. "What on earth are you doing here?" Emma asked, then gasped as she noticed the bruises. "Oh, Katherine, I left him," Katherine whispered. "I didn't know where else to go." Emma's arms tightened around her. "You came to the right place." Over coffee at Emma's kitchen table, Katherine haltingly shared her story: the charming courtship, the lavish wedding, and how Charles Ross had shown his true nature mere weeks after they'd exchanged vows. The shouting came first, then the pushing, then the beatings. How he'd isolated her from friends and family, controlled every aspect of her life until she barely recognized herself. "I took what money I could from his desk and ran," she finished. "He'll be furious when he discovers I'm gone." Emma reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "He won't find you here. You can stay as long as you need." Vincent, who had been silently listening from his place by the door, finally spoke. "Your husband's a banker in St. Louis," Katherine nodded, surprised he'd been paying such close attention. "Men like that have connections, resources," he said grimly. "If he wants to find you, he might manage it." "Vincent," Emma protested. "She deserves the truth," he replied evenly, "but that doesn't mean she can't disappear." He looked directly at Katherine. "This territory's full of women who have started over with new names, new stories." "I'll help you however I can," Emma promised. "You can stay here with me." Vincent pushed away from the wall. "I should get back to the ranch. Cattle won't move themselves." He nodded to Emma, then fixed Katherine with that clear-eyed gaze. "Miss Ross, if you need anything, my place is just over the North Ridge. Emma knows the way." After he'd gone, Emma smiled knowingly. "He's a good man, Vincent Irwin. Best rancher in the county and the most honorable man I've ever known apart from my Travis." Katherine shook her head. "I'm done with men, all of them." Emma just patted her hand. "We'll see about that." The days stretched into weeks as summer gave way to fall. Katherine found peace in the rhythm of frontier life, helping Emma tend the vegetable garden, learning to make soap and candles, mending clothes by lamplight. The bruises faded from her skin, though the ones on her spirit healed more slowly. Vincent Irwin became a regular visitor, often bringing supplies or helping with repairs Emma couldn't manage alone. Katherine found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the careful competence of his hands, the quiet respect he showed to everyone from the young boy who helped at his ranch to the Arapaho family, who sometimes traded with Emma. One crisp October afternoon, Vincent arrived with a wagon full of firewood. "Winter comes early up here," he explained as he and Katherine stacked the logs by Emma's cabin. "Need to be prepared." "You're very kind to help us this way," Katherine said, pausing to catch her breath. Vincent shrugged, his face half hidden beneath his hat. "Being neighborly, that's all. It's more than that," she insisted. "You've gone out of your way for me since the moment I arrived, and I don't understand why," he straightened, finally meeting her gaze. "Maybe I recognize something in you." "What's that?" "Courage." He picked up another log, placing it carefully on the pile. "Takes guts to leave everything you know, even when staying means suffering." Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. It wasn't courage, it was desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. He dusted his hands on his jeans. "My ma fled my pa when I was 8, took me and my sister, rode 3 days in a blizzard to reach my uncle's place." His eyes held hers. She had bruises too. The simple confession opened something between them, an understanding deeper than words. Katherine found herself telling him things she'd never spoken aloud, not even to Emma. How Charles had made her believe she was worthless, stupid, deserving of his rage. How even now she sometimes heard his voice in her head, telling her she would fail. Vincent listened without judgment, then said simply, "He lied." That evening, after Vincent had gone, Emma found Katherine sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. "You're falling for him," Emma said, not a question but a gentle observation. "I can't," Katherine whispered. "I'm still married." Emma sat beside her. "Travis had a saying, the law's the law, but right is right. What's right is for you to be free of a man who hurt you." She took Katherine's hand. "And maybe, someday, to find happiness with one who won't." The first snowfall came in November, blanketing the landscape in pristine white. Katherine stood at Emma's window, marveling at the beauty, when she spotted a rider approaching through the swirling flakes. Vincent's tall figure was unmistakable, even bundled against the cold. He stamped snow from his boots at the door, bringing the scent of pine and winter with him. "Thought you might need these," he said, presenting Emma with a sack of coffee beans and Katherine with a package wrapped in brown paper. Curious, Katherine unwrapped it to find a book of poetry, Tennyson's collected works, her favorite poet, though she couldn't recall ever mentioning it to Vincent. "Emma told me you like reading," he said, looking almost shy. "Found it in Cheyenne last week." "Thank you," she murmured, touched beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gift. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Katherine sat by the fire reading poems she'd once treasured in her father's library. Vincent's kindness had awakened something she thought long dead, a cautious hope that perhaps her life wasn't over after all. December brought bitter cold and isolation, as snow made travel between homesteads difficult. Christmas approached, and Katherine found herself watching the trail north each day, hoping to see Vincent's familiar silhouette against the snow. But as a fierce blizzard settled over the territory, even that hope dimmed. On Christmas Eve, Emma and Katherine shared a simple supper, exchanged small gifts, and reminisced about childhood holidays. As night fell and the wind howled around the cabin's eaves, they were startled by a pounding at the door. Emma opened it to find Vincent, snow-covered and half-frozen, leading a pack mule laden with supplies. "Merry Christmas," he managed through chattering teeth as they ushered him inside. "You're insane," Emma scolded, helping him remove his frozen coat. "No one travels in weather like this." "Couldn't let you ladies spend Christmas without proper fixings," he replied, as Katherine pushed a cup of hot coffee into his hands. The pack mule had carried treasures indeed, a ham, cranberry preserves, real sugar for baking, even small gifts. A woolen scarf for Emma and a pair of leather gloves lined with rabbit fur for Katherine. "They're beautiful," Katherine said, trying them on, "but you shouldn't have risked the journey." Vincent's eyes, warm as summer despite the winter raging outside, met hers. "Some things are worth the risk." The blizzard made travel impossible, forcing Vincent to stay through Christmas Day and into the next. Those snowbound days became some of the happiest of Catherine's life. They played cards, told stories, and sang carols around Emma's small piano. Vincent revealed a surprisingly good singing voice, and Catherine found herself laughing more than she had in years. On the third night, Emma retired early, leaving Catherine and Vincent alone by the fire. A comfortable silence stretched between them as she darned a sock and he cleaned his pistol, a precaution he never neglected. "Tell me about your ranch," Catherine said finally. Vincent's face softened with pride. "Started with nothing but 30 acres and 6 cattle after the war. Now I've got 400 head and one of the finest spreads in the territory." He hesitated. "It's a good life, but a solitary one sometimes." "You never married?" she asked, immediately regretting the personal question. "Came close once," he admitted, focusing on reassembling his weapon. "Mary Beth Carter, pretty as a sunrise." A shadow crossed his face. "Died of fever before we could say our vows." "I'm sorry," Catherine said softly. "It was a long time ago." He holstered the pistol. "What about you? What will you do when spring comes?" The question had haunted her for months. "I don't know," she confessed. "I have no money, no skills beyond being a banker's wife." "That's not true," Vincent countered. "You're smart, capable. I've watched you learn everything Emma's taught you. You've got more grit than half the men I know." His faith in her was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Even if that's true, I'm still a married woman. Charles would never grant me a divorce." Vincent's jaw tightened. "There are other ways to be free." Before she could ask what he meant, a gust of wind rattled the windows, reminding them of the world outside their small circle of warmth. The moment passed, but something had changed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither dared name. The storm finally broke on the fourth day, and Vincent prepared to leave. Catherine stood in the doorway watching him saddle his horse, a knot in her throat at the thought of his departure. "Will you come back?" she asked as he mounted. He looked down at her, snowlight reflecting in his eyes. "Count on it." January passed in a blur of short days and long nights. Vincent visited when weather permitted, always bringing small gifts: coffee, sugar, books. Each visit deepened the connection between them, though both carefully avoided crossing the invisible line that Catherine's married status created. In February, a letter arrived from St. Louis. Catherine's hands trembled as she recognized her friend Margaret's handwriting. Inside was news that chilled her blood. Charles had hired Pinkerton detectives to find her. They had already traced her as far as Cheyenne. "He'll never stop looking," Catherine whispered, showing the letter to Emma and Vincent. "I've put you both in danger by staying here." Emma squeezed her hand. "This is your home now. We'll protect you." Vincent's expression was grim. "Emma's right, but we need to be prepared." He turned to Catherine. "Do you have anything with your name on it? Letters, documents?" She shook her head. "Only my wedding ring." She'd kept it hidden in a small pouch beneath her mattress, unable to part with the last valuable thing she owned. "You should sell it," he advised. "Use the money to build your new life." Catherine swallowed hard. "What new life can I have while he's hunting me?" Vincent exchanged a look with Emma before answering. "There's a judge in Laramie who's sympathetic to women in your situation. He might grant a divorce without your husband present, especially if we can find witnesses to the abuse." Hope and fear warred within her. "Is that possible?" "It's been done before," Emma confirmed. "It would mean traveling to Laramie when the pass is clear." "And if the Pinkertons find me before then?" Catherine's voice shook. Vincent's hand moved to his holster in an unconscious gesture. "They won't take you anywhere you don't want to go." "Not while I'm breathing." The fierce protectiveness in his voice both comforted and frightened her. She didn't want anyone risking themselves for her, especially not Vincent. That night, unable to sleep, Catherine slipped outside to gaze at the stars. The cold air burned her lungs, but the vast, sparkling sky calmed her racing thoughts. She didn't hear Vincent approach until he draped a blanket around her shoulders. "You'll catch your death," he murmured, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted. He nodded toward the heavens. "Same stars I used to watch as a boy, makes a person feel small, but not in a bad way. As if our troubles can't be that important in such a vast universe," she suggested, something like that. He was quiet for a moment. Katherine, about what I said earlier. I meant it. I won't let anyone hurt you again. She turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close they stood. Why do you care so much what happens to me? In the starlight, his expression was earnest, vulnerable. Because from the moment I saw you step off that stagecoach, bruised but unbroken, I knew you were the strongest person I'd ever met. His voice dropped to a near whisper. And because every day since then, I've found new reasons to admire you. Katherine's heart thundered in her chest. Vincent, I'm still married. I know. He stepped back, respecting the boundary she'd set. And I'll never ask you to do anything against your conscience, but when you're free, if you ever want a new beginning, I'll be here. The promise hung between them, beautiful and terrifying in its simplicity. March brought the first hints of spring and renewed fear as reports came of Pinkerton men asking questions in nearby towns. Vincent insisted on moving Katherine to his ranch, where his loyal ranch hands could help keep watch. It's just until we can get you to Laramie, he explained as he helped her into his wagon. Emma will join us in a few days. Katherine had never seen Vincent's ranch before, and despite her anxiety, she couldn't help but be impressed. The main house was larger than she expected, 2 stories of solid pine logs with real glass windows. A bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings completed the homestead, all surrounded by fenced pastures where cattle grazed on the new spring grass. It's beautiful, she said as he showed her to a comfortable bedroom overlooking the eastern mountains. Built most of it myself, he admitted with quiet pride. Added the second story last year, he hesitated. Always thought I'd have a family to fill it someday. The wistfulness in his voice made her heart ache. This good man deserved happiness, a wife who could love him freely, children to inherit his legacy. Not a broken woman with a dangerous husband hunting her. That evening, Vincent's foreman rode in with troubling news. 2 men fitting the description of Pinkertons had been seen at the general store in Redemption Creek, showing Katherine's photograph and offering a substantial reward. They're getting close, Vincent said grimly. We need to move up our timeline. The judge will be in Laramie next week. What if Charles comes himself? Katherine asked, voicing her deepest fear. He has connections, money. Even if I get a divorce, he might not accept it. Vincent's expression hardened. Then he'll answer to me. The next morning, Vincent was teaching Katherine to shoot his Winchester rifle when hoofbeats approached from the east. They watched tensely as a rider came into view, not the feared Pinkertons but Emma, arriving early and in obvious distress. They came to my place, she gasped as Vincent helped her dismount. 2 men asking questions. I told them I'd never heard of Katherine Ross, but I don't think they believed me. Vincent's ranch hands fortified the property, posting lookouts and keeping weapons ready. Katherine spent sleepless nights by the window, watching the moonlit landscape for approaching danger. Though surrounded by Vincent's men, she'd never felt more vulnerable. 3 days later, as dawn broke over the eastern mountains, Katherine was helping prepare breakfast when shouts erupted from outside. Vincent grabbed his rifle, ordering her to stay inside, but she followed him onto the porch in time to see 4 riders approaching 2 rough-looking men she didn't recognize. A Pinkerton detective identifiable by his distinctive coat, and a figure that made her blood freeze in her veins. Charles Ross sat straight-backed on an expensive thoroughbred, looking every inch the successful banker in his tailored suit. Only Katherine knew the cold cruelty that lay beneath that respectable exterior. Vincent positioned himself in front of Katherine as the riders stopped at the edge of the yard, his men flanking him with weapons ready. That's far enough, Vincent called. State your business. The Pinkertons stepped forward. We're looking for a runaway wife, Katherine Ross. He produced a paper. We have legal authority to return her to her husband. No woman by that name here, Vincent replied evenly. Charles dismounted, his cold eyes fixing on Katherine. There's no need for pretense. I can see my wife hiding behind you like the coward she is. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Katherine, darling, you've led me on quite a chase. Katherine felt herself trembling but forced her voice to remain steady. I'm not going back with you, Charles. Of course you are, he said, as if speaking to a child. You're my wife, your place is by my side. His gaze hardened. Though you'll need to be disciplined for this little adventure. Vincent's hand tightened on his rifle. The lady said she's not going with you. Charles laughed, a sound that had once heralded Catherine's worst nightmares. The lady, is that what she told you she is? My wife is a thief and a liar who stole my money and abandoned her duties. He addressed Katherine directly. Did you tell your cowboy friend how you seduced my business partner, or about the drinking? That's not true, Katherine whispered, though the seeds of doubt Charles was planting were painfully familiar. How many times had he made her question her own reality? Enough, Vincent's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Mr. Ross, I don't care what lies you're selling. Katherine stays if she wants to stay. Charles's expression darkened. You have no legal right. I have every right, Vincent interrupted. This is my land and I decide who's welcome on it. He stepped forward. Now you can turn around and ride out, or you can try to take her. But I promise you, if you choose the second option, you won't leave here standing. The threat hung in the air, deadly serious. Katherine saw Charles calculating his odds, 4 men against Vincent and his 7 ranch hands, all armed and on their home ground. This isn't over, Charles snarled. She's my wife under the law. Laws can change, Vincent replied steadily. And out here, a man's word and a woman's choice count for more than papers from back east. For one terrible moment, Katherine thought Charles would order his men to attack. Then, with a cold smile that chilled her to the bone, he turned to mount his horse. I'll see you in Laramie, Katherine, he called. When the judge hears what kind of woman you really are, he'll order you home where you belong. As the riders departed, Katherine's legs gave way beneath her. Vincent caught her before she hit the ground, leading her gently back to the house. He'll be waiting in Laramie, she whispered. He'll twist everything, make me sound insane or immoral. Vincent knelt before her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. Then we'll fight him there too. His eyes held hers with fierce determination. Katherine, listen to me. Your bruises healed, but the ones he left on your spirit are still raw. Don't let him reopen them with his lies. His words penetrated the fog of fear and doubt. Why do you have such faith in me? Because I've seen your heart, he said simply, and it's the truest thing I know. They left for Laramie 2 days later. Katherine, Vincent, Emma, and 2 of Vincent's most trusted men. The journey was tense, everyone watching for ambush, but they reached the town without incident. The judge was staying at the Laramie Hotel, and they secured rooms in the same establishment, knowing Charles would likely be nearby. Katherine barely slept that night, imagining the confrontation to come. When morning arrived, she dressed carefully in her best dress, a navy blue calico Emma had helped her sew. She wanted to look respectable, but not like the wealthy banker's wife Charles had tried to mold her into. The judge received them in a private parlor, a grizzled old man named James Thornton, who had seen the territory grow from wilderness to civilization. His shrewd eyes missed nothing as Katherine told her story, showing the faded scars on her wrists where Charles had once bound her to their bedpost for speaking to another man at church. I have witnesses who can confirm the abuse, she finished. Women from our church in St. Louis who saw the bruises but were too afraid of Charles's influence to speak up then. Judge Thornton nodded gravely. Letters from these witnesses would help, but what of your husband's claims against your character? They're lies, Katherine said firmly. Charles isolated me, controlled every aspect of my life. When I finally fled, he couldn't accept that he'd lost control, so he invented stories to discredit me. The judge considered her for a long moment. I've seen many women in your position, Mrs. Ross. Few have the courage to seek legal remedy. He leaned forward. I'm inclined to grant your petition, but the law requires I hear your husband's testimony as well. As if summoned by the judge's words, a knock came at the door. A clerk entered and whispered in Judge Thornton's ear. It seems Mr. Ross is here now, the judge announced. Are you prepared to face him, Mrs. Ross? Katherine felt Vincent's solid presence beside her and Emma's hand clasping hers. I am. Charles entered the room with the confident air of a man accustomed to deference. He nodded politely to the judge, ignoring Katherine entirely. Judge Thornton, I appreciate your willingness to resolve this unfortunate situation, he began smoothly. My wife has been unwell for some time, prone to delusions and hysteria. Her flight west was part of this pattern of erratic behavior. That's not true, Katherine interjected. Charles continued as if she hadn't spoken. I've brought statements from her doctor in St. Louis confirming her condition. He produced several official-looking documents. I only want to take her home where she can receive proper care. Judge Thornton accepted the papers, examining them carefully. These appear to be in order, Mr. Ross. However, your wife has made serious allegations of physical abuse. Charles's expression registered perfect shock. Abuse? I've never laid a hand on Katherine in anger. These are more of her delusions, I'm afraid. He looked at her with practiced concern. Darling, you know I've only ever wanted what's best for you. The familiar twist of words, the expert manipulation that had once made her doubt her own mind, washed over Katherine. For a terrible moment, she felt herself wavering. What if she was wrong? What if she couldn't trust her own memories? Then Vincent spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Your Honor, I'd like to submit these as evidence. He handed the judge a packet of letters Emma had collected through her network of friends' testimonials from women in St. Louis, who had seen Katherine's bruises, from shopkeepers who had witnessed Charles's controlling behavior, even from a maid who had once worked in the Ross household and described the sounds of violence she'd heard from behind closed doors. Charles's facade cracked slightly. These are preposterous fabrications. They're sworn statements, Vincent countered, and there's more. The Pinkerton detective you hired, Mr. Fuller, has provided his own account. He produced another letter. Seems he developed some concerns about your character during his investigation. Judge Thornton read the new evidence, his expression growing increasingly grave. When he finally looked up, his decision was written in his eyes. Mr. Ross, I find the evidence of abuse compelling and consistent. Under territorial law, I am granting Mrs. Ross a divorce on grounds of cruel treatment. He fixed Charles with a stern gaze. Furthermore, I'm issuing a warning. You are to have no further contact with the former Mrs. Ross. Any attempt to approach or threaten her will result in criminal charges. Charles's face contorted with fury. This is outrageous. You can't possibly. I can and I have, Judge Thornton interrupted. My decision is final. You may appeal to the territorial court if you wish, but I advise against it. The evidence against you would become public record. He nodded to Vincent. Mr. Irwin, please escort Mrs. Miss Ross safely from these proceedings. Outside the hotel, Katherine stood in the spring sunshine, feeling weightless, free. The papers declaring her divorce granted were clutched in her hand, still warm from the judge's seal. It's over, she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. Emma embraced her tightly. You did it, Katherine. You're free. Over Emma's shoulder, Katherine met Vincent's gaze. He hung back, giving her space to absorb this momentous change in her life. That evening, after Emma had retired to her room, Katherine found Vincent on the hotel's small balcony, watching the stars emerge above Laramie's streets. Thank you, she said, joining him at the railing. For everything. He turned to face her, his expression serious. You don't owe me any thanks. You won your freedom yourself with your courage. I couldn't have done it without you, she insisted. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Vincent's gaze was steady, full of something that made her heart race. What will you do now? He asked. Now that you're truly free, Katherine took a deep breath. For the first time in years, her future belonged to her alone. I'm not sure yet. Emma says I can stay with her as long as I want. You could, he agreed. Or, he hesitated, then seemed to gather his resolve. Katherine, I know it's too soon. You've only just won your freedom, and the last thing you need is another man making claims on your life. Vincent, let me finish, please. His voice was gentle but determined. I'm not asking anything of you now. But I want you to know that my door is always open to you, whether as a friend, a neighbor, or, he swallowed, something more when and if you're ever ready. Katherine stepped closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his eyes. What if I told you I already know what I want? His breath caught. What's that? A home, she said softly. Work that matters. People who care for me as I am, not as they wish me to be. Her hand found his, fingers intertwining. And a man who sees my bruises, all of them, and still believes I'm strong. Vincent's free hand gently touched her cheek. Bruises heal, he whispered. Stay with me, Katherine, not as my wife, not yet, but as yourself, finding your way forward. And if that way leads to you, she asked, her heart in her throat. His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Then I'll be the luckiest man in Wyoming. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a promise rather than a demand. Katherine felt something long dormant awakening within her, not just desire but trust, hope, the belief that love could be kind. They returned to Vincent's ranch as spring bloomed across the Wyoming plains. Katherine moved into the small cabin Vincent had built for his foreman's mother before she'd returned east. There, she began crafting a new life on her own terms, learning to manage accounts for Vincent's ranch, teaching reading to the children of his workers, slowly healing from the wounds of her past. Vincent courted her properly, with patience and respect. They rode across his land together, picnicked by mountain streams, danced at local gatherings where no one questioned her right to happiness. Every day, she grew stronger, more certain of herself and her place in this wild, beautiful country. By the following spring, when the first wildflowers carpeted the meadows, Katherine knew she was ready. They were married beneath a canopy of aspens, Emma beaming through happy tears as they exchanged vows written from their hearts rather than tradition. "I promise to see you always as you truly are," Vincent said, slipping a simple gold band onto her finger. "To cherish your strength and support you when you need rest." "I promise to trust in this love," Katherine answered, her voice steady and sure. "To build our life together with courage and faith." Years passed, the ranch prospered, and children came, 2 daughters and a son who grew strong in the Wyoming sunshine, never knowing fear in their own home. Katherine sometimes caught Vincent watching her with wonder, as if amazed by the woman she'd become, ranch wife, mother, the respected treasurer of their growing community. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and crimson, Vincent took her hand, tracing the long, faded scar on her wrist. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked quietly. "About what might have happened if you'd stayed?" Katherine shook her head. "That life feels like a story that happened to someone else." She leaned against her husband's shoulder, drawing strength from his solid presence. "All those bruises healed, Vincent. You were right." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "It wasn't me who healed them. It was you, with your courage to begin again." From inside came the sound of their children's laughter, and Katherine smiled at the simple joy of it. She had arrived in Redemption Creek broken and afraid, but she'd found more than shelter. She'd found her true self, her strength, a love worth trusting, and a home where bruises were only memories that faded more with each passing year.